Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for July 28th through August 3rd, 2024. So let's get right to it. But before we dive right into the regular regional news, I wanted to briefly explain something I posted on Twitter last night, and well, myself and many others actually posted on Twitter last night with regards to indications and warnings of how serious this Iran situation is, and the timetable for an impending sort of activity, right? I'll talk more about this in a moment, but just as a general kind of idea, I think most of the world is waiting for the latest conflagration or escalation in the Middle East to kind of kick off. You know, everyone's kind of waiting to see if the conflict that, has been going on in the Middle East is going to escalate due to Iran's response to Israeli targeting. So things are tense right now, and one of the very interesting indicators that we can rely on for how serious an international event is what is historically referred to as the pizza index, or the pizza factor, or whatever. Generally speaking, we can very loosely determine if something's going on in the world by tracking food deliveries throughout Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very small place. It's not that big of a city, and most of the people who work and live, especially live in Washington, D.C., are involved with running the government in some fashion. Either they're a staffer at the Russell Senate building, or they're working as a White House staffer in the Eisenhower building, or something or other, right? The Pentagon alone has got thousands of employees that live and work in the area around the place where they work, right? So, historically, what has been done for many, many years, long before I was an analyst, you could track this by food deliveries. So when you saw pizza orders for delivery or Chinese delivery start spiking for no reason whatsoever at the pizza places around like the Pentagon or around the White House, you know something's going on. You can generally say, okay, well that means people are working late. That means that their boss or whoever has just ordered them a bunch of pizzas so they could work overnight, and that's how that works out. It's a very hip pocket sciencey kind of thing. I'm sure that a lot of the dudes who are into big data are just kind of like, cringing at how loosey-goosey this sort of analytic technique is. I'm sure someone could probably write some software to analyze this, but generally speaking, it's been a pretty solid indicator. I thought, at first, there's no way. There's no way this is an indicator of anything, but it turns out it really is. There's not that many restaurants in D.C., not that many places to go, so anybody who's working late, if there's going to be any building that people are going to be working late, unplanned, thousands of people heading into their workplace on a Friday night, it's probably going to be to do with the government in some way. So here's where the less than savory part comes in. There's now another indicator. Over the years, really since the Obama administration, I know a lot of people think this is a new thing of what I posted. It's not new. It's been around for a long time. Since the Obama administration specifically, turns out under the Obama administration, the don't ask, don't tell policy was rescinded, in the military. So you could be openly gay in the military. Well, turns out you can actually track this now. Instead of using just pizza restaurants, you can use gay bars. So what I did last night was, along with many others, like I mentioned, you can go into Google Maps and find the gay bars that are closest to the White House, the Pentagon, Russell Senate building, Eisenhower building, the ones that are closest to that, and see what their business is like. And as you can see, they were empty. Like most of the gay bars in D.C. That were closest to these places were cleaned out. There wasn't anybody there. So where's the correlation here? Well, again, like I said, it's not very good science, but it's a disturbingly accurate indicator. Let me just put it that way. Turns out you have to look at demographics, right? You have to just kind of keep the general theory of big data in your head, and you have to realize that most of the gay people in Washington, D.C. work for the government, in some form or fashion. So you're talking about a sample size which is already skewed, right? So the number of people in just the Biden White House alone, the proportion of gay representation among staffers is astronomically higher than the national average, for instance. So, similar situation at the Pentagon. You're going to find, in terms of the proportions here, the ratio of, people who would be at a gay bar to the people who would not be at a gay bar, is pretty high. It's way higher than the national average. Plus, you also have to remember intelligence tradecraft, okay? There is a reason why, for such a long period of time, people who were either gay or something like that were not allowed to hold top secret security clearances, or they were, investigated, or it was just kind of tamped down. The reason being is because espionage, okay? There is a huge blackmail potential. So, for instance, the reason that this indicator works super well, I think, is because, I think James O'Keefe himself, through his own investigative reporting over the past couple of years, has proven that this community is exceptionally promiscuous with information and other things. But mostly the information part is what matters for an information espionage perspective. You could hop on one of these degenerate apps and probably get national secrets in 15 minutes if you wanted to. But when it comes to the physical establishments, you have to remember, if you've got 5 gay dudes at the Pentagon and they're all going to go to Freddy's after work, you really have 10 gay dudes showing up, because there's going to be the 5 gay dudes from the Pentagon, and there's going to be a Chinese spy, a Russian spy, an Iranian spy, an Israeli spy, a North Korean spy, something like that. So they're going to have an intelligence collection, effort going on. I would guarantee you that any one of these establishments, 50% of the people in those establishments are foreign, intelligence agencies. So there's that. So when you have a decrease in, say, 5 people at one of these establishments, you really lose 10, because, the spy handlers are not going to be there to collect intelligence on people who aren't there. So your crowd decreases by a factor of 2. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So you're dealing with some very, very specifically skewed data that is really, it ends up being a really good indicator. So what do you do? Is just to keep, again, good data practices in perspective, you have to realize the vulnerabilities here. So the very first thing that you do when you see stuff like this, when you see this kind of data, like, oh, good grief, we're talking Friday night during happy hour and the place is empty. Okay? Well, what do you have to do? You have to check all of them. There's, I don't know, maybe a couple of dozen gay bars in DC. You have to check the ones that are closest to these establishments. So I checked all of them to check to see how their analytics were doing, and only the ones nearest the Pentagon and the ones nearest the White House were the ones that had this level of decreased traffic. All the other ones over on the other side of town, the farthest away, had normal traffic apparently. So again, Google is tracking the advertising ID of each handset, right? And these people, they take their phone and they go to these establishments and not realize that they're contributing to this big data collection effort. So, another thing to do is, rather than just get freaked out when you see this, is check the events. So Washington, D.C. specifically has a somewhat government-sponsored gay event calendar. So go check that and see if there's some kind of major, alphabet soup kind of activity going on somewhere in DC. That might explain why all these places empty out, places that are known to be frequented by Pentagon and White House employees. So again, just to make sure that your data is the most accurate that it can be, check, again, food deliveries. With the food deliveries, it's a little bit different. There's a little bit more to it than that. You have to remember how this all works, right? It's all based on handsets and advertising IDs on smartphones. There's not a whole lot of people in America that take their physical smartphone into a pizza restaurant to order takeout. What do? You call in or do it via an app, and your physical device never goes to that location, as opposed to, like, say, a gay bar or something where the person is going to take their phone in their pocket into the establishment and it's going to be geolocated via their advertising ID. So when you see traffic at pizza places spike, that means generally that there were a lot of cell phones at that pizza place. Now, again, data is data, right? What does it mean? That's all up to you to decide, right? It's up to the analyst to decide. This could be that it's a Friday night. It's a Friday night and people are wanting to go get a pizza, so they stop off after work. They take their phone, which is in their pocket, into the Pizza Hut or the Domino's or Papa John's or whatever. And, now suddenly there's a spike in activity. Google Analytics picks it up, and now suddenly we have this nice chart here. So, you could skew your data that way into saying something's going on. All I'm saying is that this is a very loose indicator that is shockingly accurate regarding some event going on around the world in Washington, D.C. This doesn't really work for any other city except for Washington, D.C. because there's other factors that can skew this very, very heavily, but there aren't that many gay bars in D.C. There are not that many people that would go to a gay bar in D.C. and not be affiliated with the government in some form or fashion. And there's also the incentive for third parties like espionage, foreign intelligence agencies to be at these establishments as well, which they would all go home for the day if there's no potential for intelligence collection. So that reduces your crowd factor by 2. So again, generally speaking, you want a rule of thumb, here it is. When the gay bars in D.C. empty out and there's nobody there, and when food deliveries spike, something's going on around the world because all these dudes are in the Pentagon, they're at the White House, they're in the Senate building, they're all working overtime, and they're eating pizza while doing so. So, that's kind of, I was surprised that a lot of people found this to be surprising. It's disturbing, and I feel like I need to take a shower now, but, that's the sort of index that, has come about. I don't think there's an official name for it. What I call it is not family friendly, so I'll just leave that to your imagination. That's kind of how this works. So kind of an interesting analytic technique. It's kind of a one-off thing. It's not a surefire thing, but man, I tell you, it has been really accurate. This exact same thing happened the last time Iran struck Israel with their long-range drones just a month ago or so. So yeah, take it for what it's worth. May help you, might not. Either way, it is an unfortunate metric that we have to track sometimes, or would be beneficial to track. So backing up to other events that have occurred in Washington, D.C. this week, there has been quite a lot. So I'll start with kind of the most inflammatory stuff and just kind of leave it at that. There was both an initial outrage and then a retraction involving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the plea deal that he was granted by the U.S. government. So on the morning of August 2nd, it became quite clear, became public in the mainstream media that the U.S. government had accepted or had put on the table and had been accepted a plea deal involving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM. For those who are unaware, he's probably target A number 1, right? He is the highest ranking guy, as far as I know. If I remember correctly, he's one of the highest ranking guys that we have detained for a couple of decades now for planning and masterminding the 9/11 attacks. So this guy is like Osama bin Laden, but we actually captured this guy. So the government offered him a plea deal, took the death penalty off the table with regards to his trial that's upcoming. His trial was scheduled for 2021, but it got shut down or pushed back due to COVID. And there was some controversy because the CIA tortured him quite a bit. So the government was trying to figure out what to do about that legally. But in any case, this dude was allegedly, but very definitely involved in the higher level thinking when it comes to 9/11. So understandably so, it was akin to, letting Osama bin Laden off with a fine, basically. That afternoon, just a few hours later, we had a signed letter from the Secretary of Defense stating that this deal is canceled. It is not in effect anymore, and we're pursuing the death penalty now, like we had been before. So this shows you the seriousness of this. I know not a lot of people put a lot of weight in things like this, and it's just kind of par for the course at this point. But hey, it takes a pretty big deal to make the Secretary of Defense jump like that and issue a letter that quickly. Usually it takes a few weeks, but no, I think that the absolute outrage over this was building, so they figured they better get ahead of it really quickly and reverse all of that. The only reason I bring it up is because, well, I wrote about it, and I wanted to make sure that it's clear now that we're now back to a status quo with KSM. However, I would also be willing to bet that this plea deal is probably going to come back after the election, so just be careful, because they'll probably try to sneak it back in there once the election's over with and we've got other issues to worry about. So anyway, speaking of other issues, Senator Lindsey Graham has gotten excited again, and he has formally introduced Senate Joint Resolution 106, which you can read for yourself. The link will be, as always, on the slides. Essentially, this bill is just to preemptively declare war on Iran if Iran threatens Israel. So we all know how this goes. I have no idea as to whether or not it's going to pass. I don't know. There's no telling, really, at this point. Just thought I'd mention it, that happened, just for posterity's sake. So moving on to the Southeast region, a couple of things sort of in the sort of DC Beltway arena is the Quantico breach incident and the sort of fallout from that. Again, for those of you who have been kind of keeping up with these, potentially mass terrorist attacks on American soil, you will know that a few months ago, Quantico, Marine Corps base Quantico, was breached by 2 Jordanian nationals driving a box truck, and the story is really, really shaky. So allegedly, the skinny is that these dudes rolled it to the gate, said they were an Amazon subcontractor trying to deliver a package. Gate guards found out that's not true. They had no affiliation with Amazon. And once that was discovered, they tried to run the gate. When they ran the gate, they ran into, of course, the pop-up barriers, were arrested, charged, all that jazz. Well, in the months since, basically, they've been given a slap on the wrist and let go. So they were in the United States illegally. One of them, depending on which story you believe, they either overstayed their student visa or they've obtained a student visa under fraudulent pretenses. Either way, they overstayed that visa. And the other one was just straight up in the U.S. illegally, came across the southern border. So far, no judge, no prosecutor has been able to figure out what exactly they were up to. But I think that it is like a kindergarten level assessment to say these guys were doing a dry run for a VBED attack, a VBI, a vehicle-borne IED attack on the base, or it was intelligence collection. But because it was in a box truck, which had the least chance of success, it probably was a VBIED attack. They were trying to see how far onto the base they could get before detonating. And because they know the U.S. treats terrorists very leniently now, they knew they would just get away. So that was probably what they were up to. So either way, the judge set their bail at $10,000 and $15,000 for the other one, which they were, of course, able to pay with cash, no questions asked. And ICE let them go. Immigration and Customs Enforcement let them go, even though they were wanted for being in the U.S. illegally, and one of them was on a terror watch list, allegedly. The sources on that are, as far as I know, not really public. So, yeah, not a super great look. It's sort of like if one of the 9/11 hijackers had been caught at TSA with like a full plan of what they were trying to do, and we just detained him and let him go a couple months later. Like, that's kind of like the level that this is at. But again, this stuff keeps happening. There was the Fort Bragg incident down there. There have been so many other incidents that have occurred. It's just not funny anymore. Like, at this point, if a 9/11 style attack were to occur, I don't even know if the American people would notice. I don't even know if the American people would be informed of such if something like that happened. So, in any case, something to keep in mind is that all of these sleeper agents and militants and questionable dudes coming across the southern border, now they've learned that they can do multiple dry runs of an attack and no one will stop them. So, you know, that's what they figured out. They'll just be let out on bail for less bail money than a jaywalking charge would get. So, anyway, not super great, but par for the course. But moving on down to Louisiana, just as a separate issue, there was an oil spill down there in the Lafourche Bayou. Looks like it's a pretty serious incident. I haven't been able to get a whole lot of information on it, though, because it seems like there's just not a lot of people talking about it down there. I've got a lot of locals who email me or message me and saying, hey, they're trying to cover this up. So I got all your messages. It's just I'm trying to, like, there's not a lot of media coverage on it. Allegedly, one of the few local media articles I found on it stated that they estimate that 34,000 gallons leaked. I don't know, but it leaked right into the bayou. And, you know, the response was pretty quick. They had booms out there pretty quickly to get most of it up. But the locals are saying this contamination is way worse than what the company and the government is saying. It also occurred directly adjacent to a water treatment plant, and the local authorities are saying the treatment plant was unaffected. It's all good. We stopped it before it got there, but locals are saying there ain't no way. There ain't no way that it's safe to drink the water down there. But in any case, I just don't have that much information on it. I just wanted to point it out because it's a critical infrastructure incident and a potential cover-up incident as well, so I thought I would mention it. Moving over to Western Europe, I also wanted to briefly mention the utter chaos that has become the United Kingdom these days. There are lots of kinetic incidents stemming from the Southport stabbing attack that took place a couple of weeks ago, or last week. So just as a brief recap, an individual of African descent, of an immigrant nature, either first or second generation immigrant, depending on how you want to categorize that, went into a yoga studio which was hosting a children's dance sort of activity, and proceeded to try to murder the inhabitants within. 3 children were murdered in this attack, and around half a dozen others, including the adults, were severely injured in this attack. Now, unfortunately, these styles of attacks have become normalized throughout the United Kingdom, but this one was especially heinous, not only because of the very gruesome murder of very small and innocent children, which is just horrifically bad by itself, but because of the government response to it. Now, I know a lot of people just want to focus on the event, but this is important, so I'll go over it. Immediately following the event, the government locked down and shut down basically any information about the suspect. The judge decided to release the suspect's name, the assailant's name, because he was just 3 or 4 days shy of turning 18 years old. So he's not exactly a minor, you know. Legally, it's questionable. Either way, the judge made the call and says, hey, this is a grown dude. And so the potential for misinformation is too high, so his name became public. Well, once that happened, the British media, the state-sponsored British media, started running news articles like in support of this kid, who's not actually a kid at all, as a matter of fact. They ran stories of the attacker here when he was like an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old kid. They literally had headlines talking about how he was in a musical and how he was upcoming, and he's just an innocent kid who went astray or something like that. Well, this caused a lot of problems because the locals found out immediately that this was a grown dude. This is a full-grown man, and he had previously made knife attack threats, and he had previously threatened genocide. And when he appeared before the judge after this attack, he was smiling and laughing about his actions. So, talk about gasoline on the flames here. It just made it so much worse. The British media is continuing to use pictures of him when he was a very young child, and not the fact that he was a full-grown dude who looked like he's 35 years old at the time of his arrest. In any case, oh man, it's just not good. So from that, mass demonstrations were planned and are actually being conducted right now in Southport, in Sunderland, and a lot of other cities throughout the UK, like right now, today. And they've gotten fairly kinetic. So as you can see, it's a fairly intense situation. It's not exactly something that people are taking lying down anymore, just due to the political response, which has not been good. So again, adding more fuel to the fire. The Prime Minister, their new Prime Minister, has basically done everything he can to exacerbate tensions. So instead of announcing a new task force to combat knife crime and to crack down on these people waving knives on the streets every day in the UK, he has announced that he is pulling out all the stops to create a new task force and using AI and facial recognition to target the people protesting knife crime. So, yeah, to be expected for sure, but you can see things are getting pretty serious. And just to show you how serious things have gotten, for those of you who have maybe cracked a history book every now and then, I'll show you this clip here, which is of some of the demonstrations that got a little bit more kinetic. And as you can see on one side of the street, there have been many counter protests that have sprung up in support of the attacker, in support of immigrants, in support of all of this. And there have been clashes, but as you can see from some of these protests, you quite literally have a street dividing one group of protesters and another group of protesters, and the counter-protesters are waving socialist, communist, pride flags, Antifa flags, all this stuff. And on the other side of the street, you've got the Irish flag and the Union Jack being waved together. You know, I don't want to read too much into that, but man, it sure is an indicator that all that was needed to bury the hatchet over the 20 years of the Troubles was to import a bunch of violent immigrants from Africa. Turns out that was really all that was needed to get the British and the Irish on the same team again. So anytime, you know, I don't want to read too much into it, but I mean, look, man, anytime the Irish Catholics and the British Protestants are putting aside their differences, you should pay attention. Like, good grief, like that is one of Europe's maybe not oldest conflicts. I mean, it does go back a long ways, but it's one of the most severe conflicts the UK has faced, and Northern Ireland in particular has faced on their homeland in a long time. So when you see these people teaming up together, you got to wonder, who are they teaming up against? So anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting note to reflect on this week. Moving over to the Middle East, I think everyone's kind of awaiting to see what Iran's going to do with regards to all of the Israeli targeting that has occurred over the past week or so. I don't have a whole lot of information. I know a lot of people get upset that I'm not the fastest with, wire reports or something like that, but I would rather be correct than first, because with stuff like this, with the information warfare, with narrative shaping occurring even on the free speech platform that Twitter is, right? There's been a lot of fake information coming out and a lot of really bad, misleading information. So really just the general bottom line for the American taxpayer is understand that probably within the next couple of days, surely within the next couple of weeks, there's probably going to be a very large escalation in the Middle East. How big of an escalation? I don't know. It depends on the parties involved. Iran may choose to do what they did last time, which was essentially nothing, and give Israel as much advance warning as possible. Or Iran could finally say enough's enough. Our citizenry wants to is griping that we're not doing enough, so here's some significant targeting. I don't know. It really depends on what these people want to do. Clearly, the DC Beltway thinks that there's something's up and something's going to happen within the next few days, so they're all working overtime to fix this sort of thing, or prepare products for when this does finally occur. But generally speaking, tensions are not de-escalating, they are escalating. So again, for the American taxpayer who doesn't give one hoot about the Middle East, you may want to understand that we may see cyber attacks from malign actors, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, the usual suspects, right, who may seek to destabilize the United States when stuff pops off here. when the FBI, the CIA, Congress, and all the intelligence agencies are looking here, they're not looking at the homeland. So, you know, we may see a deprioritization of homeland threats during escalatory times such as these. So something to be aware of. Remain vigilant. Please, please, please pay attention. I know I say that a lot, and I know not a lot of people listen, but, you know, the average citizen, the average taxpayer is sometimes the first and only line of defense against a major terror attack, as we have seen over the past few weeks. So, again, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut has basically said, you know, hide your kids, hide your wife kind of thing, get out while you still can. I don't know if the situation is that severe. Clearly, they think so. They don't want to be left holding the bag. So I know there's somebody at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut just sitting there typing away. They're trying to get people to leave so they don't have to organize a mass military evacuation if things pop off as a result of Israel invading Lebanon or being targeted by Iran, and this whole thing just snowballing out of control. They're trying to do the right thing and front load the effort and get Americans out. I mean, if I was living in Lebanon, I probably wouldn't leave if I was Lebanese, but you know, it's the status quo really. But if I was an American and you could leave, yeah, you probably should have left Beirut by now. Just because Israel has demonstrated that they have no problem striking targets in Beirut with absolutely zero repercussions from anyone. So, you know, just remove yourself from the equation. It's a lot easier to evacuate before the shooting starts, because once the shooting starts, evacuations become very, very costly and very, very dangerous. So, again, if you can, for all 4 people watching this in Lebanon, you know, that's kind of what I think about that sort of thing. Again, generally speaking, I'm not digging a hole in my backyard preparing for the nuclear apocalypse on this one. It's very much a case of tempered expectations with regards to conflict in the Middle East, and, you know, the international norms and mores shifting, those goalposts shifting to where, well, you know, Israel and Iran now openly trading, you know, missiles in the air is now kind of a normal thing. Whereas in years past, people would say that's just kind of a harbinger of the apocalypse. I don't know. I'm not really too worried about it, to be honest. I would make sure your gas tanks are topped off. You know, make sure you've got some cash on hand. Make sure your batteries are good and charged. You've got some solar stuff. You know, just general basic preparedness stuff. Nothing, you know, too crazy, of course, but just the basic stuff that you should be doing already. So that's pretty much all I have for news. Let's talk about the intercepted GhostNet reports. And again, fantastic that this network seems to be working. I know it's not exactly appealing to a lot of people, but give it time. Give me some time to put some basic content together. I did want to highlight one report, though, which came in exceptionally clear. I think the gentleman was in Texas or somewhere like that, because he's talking about Hurricane Beryl. So I'm guessing he was somewhere in Texas or, you know, Midwest or something like that, Gulf Coast. And his transmission came through exceptionally clear for me, which is that's a long way, because I'm in the Mid-Atlantic region. And on top of that, if we look here at the waterfall, we can see that someone else, not affiliated with any of this GhostNet stuff, was transmitting at the same time on the across the whole spectrum here. So what does this mean? Well, ordinarily you'd be jammed. You would be not able to transmit because someone's talking over the top of you and they're drowning you out. They're drowning your signal out. Well, in this case, this message came through really clearly. And it kind of just, I wanted to talk about that because it kind of highlights JS8 calls, I hate to call it jamming resistant. Much more work needs to be done to test this, but you will find a lot of times that even if people are talking over the top of each other, even with other digital modes like VAR-AC or WinLink or something, you can still get a message across and you can still be heard. So I thought that's very, very interesting just because of how the bits work their way out. So again, you know, not a guarantee. I can't like put that rubber stamp on it and say JS8 calls resistant to jamming, but it seems to be more resistant than other modes, right? But again, digital modes are kind of like that. So, much more work needs to be done on that. I just thought that was kind of interesting because I was expecting, once I saw that coming in, I thought, I'm getting ready to lose this guy's report. Now I can't get a good screenshot. And boom, it went right through, crystal clear the entire time. So that was pretty cool to see. So again, really good stuff that I'm seeing on the GhostNet. Really glad to see the participation we're seeing. I know it's not easy, but it's one of those things that you got to put in the work ahead of time so that when the chips are down, you've got something to lean back on. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Here are the sources for what I've talked about today and for some of the wire reports throughout the week. Hopefully this weekend will be decently peaceful. I just know that as soon as I turn this camera off and start editing this, something's going to happen and I'm going to have to push out a wire report or something, but that's always how it is, isn't it? So hopefully we'll have a peaceful weekend and we can get back to it on Monday with the regular wire reports. But for everyone's edification, I'm fairly certain we're going to see at least probably 2 or 3 priority wire reports this week. Who knows? But just don't be surprised if you see some of that. So anyway, that's all I have for today. We'll get back at it with the regular stuff on Monday, like I said, and I guess I'll see you then. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for all of your support, and we'll see you next time. So as always, fight in the shade.